Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker. I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people, currently known as San Diego County in California, United States. And welcome to your teaming transformation. So this is a series that accompanies my new book, which is coming out very soon, July, the Teaming Transformation. So this introduction is actually recorded after we did the workshop because a lot of my guests have heard it before and I kind of forgot to press record. So welcome. I think this is a question that we all grapple with these days. How can we make the changes that we know are needed? God knows there's enough of them, right? And how can we make those changes that we know are needed? And for so much of it, we have everything we already need. We have the technology. We even have the will in most cases. Not everybody's on board. You don't need everybody to do it. So how can we make these changes, and why is it not happening faster? And we get very frustrated seeing how slow these changes are. And things just don't happen as fast as we'd like them to. For me, I'm an evolutionary biologist. I got my start, this is, when I was 18 years old. I backpacked the Hawaiian Islands with a copy of E.O. Wilson's book, Island Biogeography, with MacArthur and Wilson. And it changed my life, I mean, I was already on that track. I was a biologist from the beginning. I got my master's degree studying these gelada baboons, which are the same baboons that Dunbar studied, and actually the same area, same kind of field sites. So yes, and then my doctoral work was in baboons with these two very different kinds of baboons, look different social structures, were hybridizing in this broad zone. So we've been collecting genetic samples for 25 years across this 1,000 individuals, and tracking the gene flow across this area. So their capacity for evolutionary change was directly affected by their social structure, and it affected their social structure in return. So those patterns I was able to actually see. So then I spent 12 years running a business as an entrepreneur, and then finally discovered biomimicry, and everything came together. So now I take those deep patterns and I help organizations apply them to change the way that we live and work. I really do think that we have everything we need. It's a question of the way that we see the world and the structures and processes we live in. So that's my hope with this work, is to shift the paradigms, the structures and processes that we live and work in, so that we can grow conditions conducive to life, like all living things do.
So I take those evolutionary learnings and I apply them in organizational settings. So what would we design our companies like if we were trying to actually get things done? How would nature design them? So that's what we do. So, here it is. Here's our current paradigm. Everything is like scale up, right? And I don't know if you ever saw The Gods Must Be Crazy, but with a Coke bottle falls and they're just like, what the hell are these people doing? And that's where we're at. So, and how do we scale up? It's we take it apart. I mean, I'm a scientist, so I'm trained in this. You take apart a system, you analyze it, you metrics, measure it, and you make predictions and all those things. And then, but whose data is that? Whose assumptions are that? Whose outcomes are that? And so basically it comes down to we're living in someone else's world. And then, everything we do is just ends up being reactionary. We just got to downsize or restructure or do things to people or whatever. What you always hear is, if only we could educate people, if only people knew, but again, that's an imposition. So what we get now is this fragile patchwork of expensive solutions and eroding creativity and care and fragmented understanding and response and unintended consequences. So failure becomes catastrophic, and that's really where we're at. And I think we're all at that point in various ways. Like it's It's scale free. So, but we are biological creatures. We're animals, and we're subject to Earth's special conditions, all of us. So things flow downhill, you know. The conditions of Earth produce these patterns that are recognizable and true at every scale. So here we are, we're living things, we're designed to thrive and adapt, just like every other creature, but our organizational structures and processes are not supporting that natural ability. They actually constrain us from doing the thing that we're designed to do. And Harry's seen this one before, but you know, if you Google STEM, there's no living things in any of the logos. So it's like we just pretend we're not part of it. I don't know. So, but the result of that is that our leaders are blind and illiterate when it comes to the way that evolution works and living systems work, and even the way our own human nature works. There's just it's astounding the level of blindness and illiteracy. So that's sort of my role, is like, I'm going to help people get up to speed on reality. But life's purpose, what is life's purpose? It's to nurture the next generation and ensure its success. So all living things are doing that, and all of the living things, including us, that made it to the present, did this. So we all have it in our DNA. It's baked in. But is it survival of the fittest? You know, we were kind of raised on that idea of evolution as survival of the fittest. And it is true, they are competing. But when you compete, it actually diminishes resilience. You know, here's the only reason that organisms actually compete is for chicks, basically. You see these big old horns, like, nobody would want that getting around, right? But that's competition does that. So life in general actually avoids wasting energy in life on competition. And these are walking palms. This is Geoversity. This is our campus up there in Panama. And these walking palms, if they don't like where they're at, they walk away. So yeah, they're like, hey, there's no light here. We'll just go over here. And that's the way that life works. It goes where resources and partners and options can be reliably found. So life doesn't solve problems the way that we do. It just finds the next open door. Like we saw in that, you know, things just flow to where they're going. Those patterns are consistent because of that. And so from that process, you know, we now have 30 million species from those first sparks of life. And that's really from organisms avoiding competition. And so here we have these termites. These are these macro termites in Botswana, where I was a couple years ago. And some of these towers are like 30 feet tall. They're amazing. And so what these termites do, they come out at night and they look for little specks of grass and twigs, things that aren't useful to anybody else. And they bring them down into their mounds and they chew them up into a paste, and they fertilize their fungal gardens underground with that. And so the fungal gardens consume that. And in the process, the grass gets richer and more herbivores come, and their dung fertilizes the ground and their carcasses fertilize the ground, and carnivores come, and it just gets richer and richer, right? And so these are superorganism species like us. They work together. So you can see the herbivores here coming, and even the dung beetles, you know, rolling the dung away. So everybody has a role, but the whole territory is getting richer and richer. And we're superorganisms too. These are my little kiwis. And they are a superorganism. So, but superorganisms like ants or honeybees or termites or ourselves are independently perceptive and creative individuals, but they fundamentally depend on one another to launch the next generation. So they might be able to live alone for a little while, but they cannot regenerate themselves. They cannot regenerate the next generation alone. So here's the general superorganism pattern. And this is where we're getting into some fresh material. So many eyes and minds gather value different individuals. And then what they do is they gather it and they pool it and they upcycle it in value with by symbiotic partnerships. So like the termites are bringing that stuff to the fungus, and the fungus is digesting it. Leafcutter ants do that as well. Honeybees are gathering pollen from flowers, and that's fertilizing the flowers. And then they're fermenting that nectar into honey with bacteria. So they're all doing that, these kind of partnerships. And then those symbionts, those partnerships, break that value down and return it to the territory. So like you saw with the termites, it's getting richer and richer there on site. It's not this sending it away here and there, like it grows richer in place. And so those territories grow richer and they're worth defending. Like, if you know about hornets or honeybees or yellow jackets, like they know how to protect their stuff. Here is the general pattern for superorganisms. So they share an identity and they gather these raw resources individually. To swarm creativity, they all have different roles and individuals are doing different things. And that requires collective intelligence, individual diversity and autonomy and communication. And then they're symbiotically upcycling with these other relationships with other organisms, which requires attention. It requires care. And by doing that, they're able to regenerate their identity. So that place sourced regeneration is critical, this line, that we've basically eliminated. So, we're chimpanzee is we share a common ancestor about 5-6 million years ago, which is the blink of an eye in evolutionary time. And they're very caring with each other. They have love and empathy and all that. And they're very clever. They can solve problems. But what they don't do is they don't solve problems together. And they are also, highly dominant based. They have dominance hierarchies. So, and really that empathy is what it really is ability to mind read so that they can be good politicians. It's really manipulation is what they've adapted to. And so we have that and we've repurposed it. If you think about it, a two-legged chimp would starve if he sprained an ankle. There's a reason why we're on two legs. Like if we weren't superorganisms, we could not live this way. Like no animal would live on two legs because you lose one and you're a monopod. It's not resilient, except for the pogo stick people. And yet, so we're superorganisms all the way, we fit the bill in every way. And yet we're so bad at it. Like here's these termite mounds and they require 0 fossil fuels to keep these structures within 1 degree Celsius. And here's our cities, and 20% of the world's annual energy is required to keep them within 1 degree Celsius, if they even do that. And that's because we require conscious evolution. That's our special talent. We have to think about these things and we have to teach each other the right way to do things. We don't just instinctively do it. And it's really, that's our special sauce, right? We're amazing. We're amazing at it. But it requires culture as like a guardrail and a collection of knowledge that helps us know what to do and how to do it. I've been spending a lot of time in Panama with Kuna people, and they have these dugout canoes. These are not them, but they have dugout canoes similar to this. And you can really see like it goes back to their song and story and their origin stories. It's all grows out of place. It's one place, one people. So cultures support our capacity for conscious evolution in the places that we live. It's different everywhere. And that song and story, we've lost most of that. But it's critical to knowing your identity, and that's really where their shared purpose comes from. So conscious evolution requires cultures that support it. And that's, I think, our work. And so what I am offering here is this 5 teaming patterns. So these are patterns that all superorganisms share. And I think they can help us see hidden potential because, it's the same pattern for us. And so we can see where our deficits are more clearly by backing way up. Like in the beginning, here comes a queen, let's say the queen ant, and there's a nuptial flight. All the ant queens, the virgin queens, fly into the air on this certain time when things are just right. And the males go up there and they mate as much as they can. But that queen then has to go start a new colony. So the colony will all come from her. She is their shared purpose. She's the thing that unifies the whole thing. And she scent marks all the members they belong. The first thing that happens here, you got this identity, and she's going to make eggs and larvae, and she's going to create a workforce. So, and then that workforce is going to go out and collect these raw resources and start building the colony. And here you can see these bees doing that. And then, and what happens if that line, let's go back, if that line is compromised, what happens? She doesn't get enough food, and her nestmates don't get enough food, and the colony dies. So here you take these raw resources. How do they collect these? Swarm creativity. They're all doing it uniquely. They all have their own roles. Here with the leafcutter ants, they're foraging for work. Nobody's telling them what to do. They're just going to look for what needs to be done. And they all do it in their own way. And here's how we do it too. Like these specialized roles that we take on expand our collective capability and resilience. And then for humans, 75%, at least in foraging peoples, 75% of their food is acquired by someone outside their immediate family. And that's weird for any animal, unless you're an ant. And the real diagnostic is that all the great ape mamas do their own childcare, and we share half on average globally. That's a fundamental difference, like a deep biological difference. And our babies understand fairness instinctively. Like if you have a plate of cookies and you share them unfairly with 2 older kids, a baby will look at you like you're out of your mind. They already know. And so what happens is these superorganisms work in these teams of teams. And so they're actually like, I don't know if you've read General Stanley McChrystal's Team of Teams. Yeah, but that is exactly how they work. So it's pretty much groups of 3 is typical. And the 3 have very different personalities. The one of them is much more active and tends to roam around a lot and also climb up grass and get big views. And they're also running into other ants more often. So they're sharing that information. And so that those are almost like leaders that knit these little modules together into a fabric. And they also spread those patterns around. And we do the same thing. Here's this Hamadryas baboons I studied. They do the exact same thing. They have a very superorganism-like structure that's a lot like ours, where they travel in these little modules, these little units, and they have different roles. So, okay, so we do that same thing. And then, but that requires collective intelligence. That requires our diversity, our autonomy, and it requires communication. And obviously it requires shared purpose. So these like ants, they're doing distributed work in making little small imperfect decisions all the time, and they're constantly course correcting. So one ant does something the best it can, another one comes along and just does it better. And that's what's going on all the time. They don't have any org charts or meetings or predictions or targets or any of that stuff. Definitely no bosses. The queen, all she does is a regulator. She just regulates the allocation of workers and the pacing. So the collective intelligence, here's a slime mold, and I like to think of these as organisms as well, because these are genetically distinct individuals. Actually, this is Physerum. I don't think these are genetically distinct, but most slime molds are genetically distinct individuals, and so they're all going out and looking for food. And when they find it, the whole colony can coalesce into that one good decision. And so it allows them to be exploratory and find things, but at the same time efficient enough to, when they do find it, get it. So these two patterns are the most important for daily operations. And so as a business person, generally, like what I get is people coming to me asking me for help with this, and I work a lot with Cisco in these areas, like WebEx. But here's the classic example of the honeybee waggle dance. So these bees, when they need to find a new home, the scouts, or the oldest, most experienced bees, they go out in different directions looking for these homes, and they'll take their time evaluating it. And then they come back and they do this waggle dance, this little figure 8 dance that tells the other bees how good it is, what direction, how far. And the more she likes it, the more of those dances she does. And so the more bees see it. And any bee that sees it will go and check it out. So you can see it starts this process of amplifying good sites, and poorer sites fade away. So you kind of get this dance floor of competing ideas. And they're all, honest. No bee's going to dance for a site she hasn't seen. There's no sharing the post without reading it in bee world. And so you can see that for that collective intelligence to work, you've got to have that honest competition of ideas. You can't shut ideas down. You need to solicit as many diverse ideas as you can. And so you see that with foraging peoples. They're fiercely egalitarian. Everyone has the right to their own personal freedom and independent thought, and that's really critical. You see in chimpanzees, they're all sociopaths, right? And so, but for us, only the most dominant individuals openly attempt to rule through force and fear. We pretty much know it's not polite, and we at least try to make the attempt of pretending that we're doing the right thing. And so once we've got this part of it, then we've got this symbiotic upcycling. We have to take care of these relationships with these, like, let's say we have a food forest, we have to feed those trees, we have to care for those trees, because that is what is going to deliver those raw resources again in the next generation. And so superorganisms are masters of this. So here's these fungi, and in the beginning, what is it, a good billion or 2 or 3 years ago, the fungi, the plants were all still in the ocean and the seas. And so, but the fungi were able to allow them to move into terrestrial habitats, because they only have these little roots. So the fungi supplemented their roots so that they could connect to one another and also get the nutrients and the things that they needed. So that is quite an enabler. And now you look, and the fungi are trading this sugar with the trees and bringing the nutrients, and they're even helping the trees. They're moving sugar from to their babies. And so that's the superorganism pattern of actually creating ecosystems that feed the whole world. And that's pretty amazing. And so that is within us. That kind of power is within us if we are designing this way. So what we're lacking, I think, in those systems is that we're not feeding what feeds us, because we don't have that full pattern. These are these little acacia ants, and it's cool because the acacia gives them a home, and in return the ants protect the acacia, and that's a superorganism pattern, that interdependence. So if you do not have this line that the symbiotic upcycling to the shared identity, you've lost your shared identity. And that's what we've missed. All of the stories and songs and the shared identity that we've lost that. Really, we're not intimate with land that feeds us. And the reason is because the structures and processes that we operate under were imposed on our ancestors by force, so that they could steal their communities and reduce us to host land. It was a parasitic act, right? We've been parasitized. So now here we have it. We have little shared purpose. We have almost no place source cultural identity. We don't really have mentors and peers and elders that see and develop each other. It's really hard to feel seen for a lot of people, which is really tragic. And then there's no commons for us to grow the value or to tend those symbioses in. We don't even have a community food forest or anything like that. And there's no structures for growing and protecting that value. We can't even grow that value if we wanted to, because there's parasites. So parasites, anytime you have a lot of value, it's going to attract those parasites. And anytime you have collaborative value, it attracts free riders. And cheater strategies are very successful until the hosts get wise and correct for that. And how do they do it? They profit through deception, and superorganisms are plagued by them because they'll just, and it's always a sister taxa, it's their closest relatives, but they pretend to be the larvae, or they make the scent of the queen, or they use deception to gain entry to the nest, and then they eat the young. Or they sterilize the queen, and then the rest of the workers take care of her and take care of her eggs. So superorganisms are always trying to protect themselves from parasites. And these are interesting, I think, from the pandemic perspective of that. They, because they work in these teams of teams, they're very resilient. So they, when they do get infected, they can quarantine very easily without compromising the function of the colony, because just one team will stop. And they do vaccinate, they lick each other. We could do that too. And then the oldest ants work outside and in the most dangerous roles. And they don't go all the way down to the chambers where the queen and the nursery is. So you have this natural separation of what's core in value. That's how they do it. If anybody wants to elect me president, I'll do that next time we have a pandemic. We cannot lick each other. Okay, so here we go. Here's our lovely, healthy superorganism, and look, they're feeding what feeds them. All good. Oh no, there's a parasite. Oh, he's coming in. What's he doing? Okay, first thing they do, destroy swarm creativity and collective intelligence, because it's really just about the host labor. They just want the host labor. And so all they want is for the host labor to bring them these resources. So that's what happens. So you cut out the collective intelligence. Now our diversity doesn't matter. Our autonomy doesn't matter. Our communication doesn't even matter, except if, as much as it helps the parasites get their stuff. So swarm creativity, it doesn't really matter what we do. Our unique individual talents don't really matter that much. And then what happens is the shared identity fades, especially if the parasite just steals the land too. And then this waste starts accumulating, because previously that was feeding the raw resources. So now that connection is severed. So you've got waste, host labor, and then eventually the raw resources run out and the parasite just jets by and moves on to another planet. Or, another town. Okay, so slaving sisters are the sister tax of their hosts, their closest living relatives. They speak the language, they can pass. So all around us. And without swarm creativity, we're just host labor, disengaged, unhealthy, purposeless, unseen. All our good stuff going to waste. We have so much potential is just going wasted. So, I mean, how are we supposed to fulfill our natural talents when we have salaries forcing us to compete against each other? I mean, would superorganisms do that? Report lines, telling each other what to do. They don't do that. Information silos, not sharing information. They would never do that. There's no sense of we, no like bounded sense of we anywhere. We don't even try to see each other and develop one another. That's alien. I mean, we have teachers, but we don't pay them very well. And then, and we don't have psychological safety. So why would we even contribute our diverse opinions and knowledge? And then we don't have any structures for growing the value and trust together if we were even able to overcome this. Now, we lack information, we lack permission, we lack pattern expertise. We everything's done for us. So, we've eroded our critical thinking and even our ability to see. We just take the assumptions that we're handed. And our imagination is eroding as well. We can't even imagine a world where we're living things adapted to thrive and grow, better places. So we lack agency, belonging, hope, and interest. So how are we supposed to make any change? No, we can't solve the world's problems with these parasitized mindset. But the thing about parasitism is it's the primary driver of host evolution. So the problem contains the solution. So hosts are always evolving defenses. They're trying to prevent parasitic entry, and they use transparency to try to reveal them. You don't have any boundaries that you're enforcing. Like for instance, Facebook is this global network. There's no boundaries. There's no who are these people? We don't know. That's crazy. And then the other thing they do is they're always jamming those parasitic tactics. So they're always making it harder for them. I mean, all we do is we got some passwords, and that's a linear thing. And I was talking to somebody who's talking about jokes. They use jokes as passwords because they're more complex. Here's what I see the leverage points on fighting the parasitism that we are infected with. We've got to prevent the deception and control. A lot of that could be done through social media. And then just insisting on transparency and truthful information, protecting personal freedom and autonomy, sharing work and wealth equitably, like the way we have it with salaries and all of this. It's just you can't work together that. And then pro-social is a big thing, and that's something I work on a lot with the Evolution Institute. So our closest relatives are the chimpanzees and bonobos. So the bonobos often get forgotten because we don't know that much about them. They live in the Congo, and it's very hard to do work there, and they're shy. But what they do is, chimpanzees are very dominant, and they like to run things. But in bonobo society, that doesn't happen because anytime a male tries that, the females come together and shut it down. The bonobo revolution, baby. I do have t-shirts. I have bonobo revolution t-shirts. They're epic. But anyway, so that's also within us. I like to think that is also within our potential. And it's an interesting way to, and I think it's also interesting, in Panama, the Kuna people are matriarchal and the women run everything. And it's, they even fought a revolution and won. And the way they did it was the women used their lullabies as to convey the information for the revolution. So politicians need big brains. Here's just a lot of that I used to work with. We know with Dunbar's number, the bigger the average group, the bigger the average brain, and it's the politics. So, but we like to live in these groups of 150, and that's what our brain tells. The brain size would predict as well. So if we could form these teams of teams that are pulled together by shared purpose and grow into networks of 150 that are place sourced, it seems to me that we could do things very quickly. And so I'd like to see those kinds of structures emerging for everybody to join into. But leaders, can be all of us. So in the superorganisms, they use distributed leadership. 1 out of 3 individuals is a leader. and they don't need to know everything. What they're doing is just tying it all together. And also they are protecting and growing that collective intelligence, which means more diversity and more autonomy for individuals. And they're protecting that potential, that unique potential for individuals. They are strengthening and spreading that clarity of purpose so that everyone's working for the same thing. And essentially, it's protecting spaces where helping and sharing add up for everyone. And I think that if leaders had that thinking, and if they understood how the superorganisms work, I think this would be powerful, and we can make a fire. Okay, I'm going to open it for talk. Stop the share. All right. Thank you.
Bravo.
I have
Guys got anything to
probably
say?
about I have
Our
like
revolution?
6 hours of things to say. So
Start.
I can't hear you, Harry. The next one we got June 2nd is the last one of these workshops, and what I'm hoping is that we can share this one so that, and then get a lot of people to the last one so we can really talk about what this would look like, what we can do with it. I do offer one-on-one consulting, and I would love to hear your feedback and questions and all that. I just love to hear that. And then also, this is going to be a course, a 6-week course that'll start on July 14th, Bastille Day. Seems reasonable. So yeah, if you want to share that, cool. These are my 3 endeavors. You can check up, see what I'm working on: Rehumanized Minds, Team Lab, and Geoversity. That's got all my stuff on it. And that's it. All right.
Yes, now.
Yes, I can. It was me.
Awesome.
okay.
So does that add up? What do you think? Is that crazy? I just really want to get this out in the world.
Yeah, you're well on your way. Nature's been radioing this information for millennia. We still haven't heard it yet.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this repetitive notion of listening to music on the radio. Then you get to hear it and sing along with it. So what you're presenting has to be presented over and over and over again until it gets past the brain part that's not listening.
I know. And it drives me nuts to have to do the same. I mean, I only got one shtick. But
That's,
yeah.
and Gloria Gaynor had a one sing wonder, right?
Whoa.
And she's still around in that sound.
Mhm.
So it's phenomenal that, here we all are. We've been in this frequency for a couple of decades now, trying to get this shift going on, but
Mhm.
it's slowly happening. It's slowly beginning to take hold. The big picture has grabbed it. The top have recognized it. The bottom is recognizing it. Everybody in between has to now get
Yeah.
to this point.
Mhm.
So you're preaching to the choir here,
I know.
and it's just about how we continue collectively and collaboratively get this to go out there on a larger megaphone, and hopefully people are listening. The
Yeah.
biologists are listening.
I do hear. I am hearing that. But what I think it's partly the power of this is that lots of people, all the stuff we know, right? But it's always delivered in a way of what we should do. We should do this because it's the right thing to do, morals, da-da-da. And everyone has different morals. And so people are like, well, but they're not like me, so therefore that is questionable. But if you look at it this way, like biologically, you're like, oh, it's just, that's how it is. Like, I don't know. It's just like looking at beetles. So I hope that taking the value out of it in that way, it can be more, less triggering to people so they can calm down and look at it more objectively.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I mean, I said earlier, I've got about 6 hours of questions, so I'll try to contain myself. The parasite part, I thought this is a really interesting analogy. I'm curious, you either evolve to survive, life's principle, or you don't. So when the hosts are adapting defenses, is there something there in that mechanism, like the way that the adaptation is diffused throughout the population, that makes for that is able to keep the colony from collapsing, right? And is there a case where the parasite will become extinct in response to the host evolution, or is it always that sort of predation or parasite host sort of back and forth? So those are the two questions. One is, how does that information get distributed across the host so that they can change? And the second one is, what are the potential and the likely outcomes for the parasite in terms of their adaptation and their extinction?
Right. So I'll do the second one first. That those percentages, there's always parasites present, and the ants do not try to eliminate them. They go for like a triple cocktail type of HIV process, where they'll have several that just keep them on their toes, and so they try to minimize it as much as possible. And so it, like, typically it'll oscillate, and so sometimes the percentage of parasites could be like 15%, and sometimes it could be as high as 85%. So it kind of goes like that all the time. And so it's something that's always there driving evolution. You can't get rid of it all the way, and nor would you even really want to, because it's just part of that process, but minimizing it as much as possible. But the what you see in nature is that parasites exist, but they're always a marginal existence. Because their density is always kept in check by the host. So it's a niche strategy. It's never going to take over the world.
So when you say niche strategy, are you saying, sorry, I didn't mean to jump on that. The niche strategy part. So you're saying rather than a deep pattern, each relationship will kind of oscillate on its own sort of wavelength there?
Like if, say, the colony was unhealthy, or if the colony was naive to an infection, it might go, like, they might almost get wiped out. Maybe they do get wiped out and the parasite has to move on.
Okay.
But the percentage of like the sister taxa that becomes a slave making species will never be very widespread, because they rely on the naiveness of their host. So right, so that's the one thing. And then the other thing is there is no mechanism for telling the whole well, that's not true. So termites, what they'll do, some species, when they're under attack, they start vibrating and the whole mound will start knocking, and then all the workers come and kind of pour out of it. So they have those kinds of things for defense. But mostly their biggest defense is just preventing entry. So like a lot of species will even have like heads that are shaped like the hole, so they can just plug the hole. And so really the analogy there would be like all the deceptive parasitic messages on Facebook and that, you would stop that. They would have stopped that already. But then the first thing they're doing is checking for identity. So they go, are you me or are you other?
And so we don't have any method of doing that. We don't know who people are.
For the authentication, you mean?
Yeah. Mhm.
Huh. I'm gonna sit on my hands and make some notes. So
Okay.
if somebody else had some questions.
So is it possible that the parasite purpose is to alert the other that there's something wrong in your company?
Well, for sure. I mean,
Yep,
it's an
Paul.
indicator. Yeah.
So wouldn't that be like a backup plan for security when the parasite shows up? Because in a forest, when the beetles come, I think the tree that gets it the most actually communicates to the rest of the trees, so it sacrifices itself
Right.
in order to let the rest of the neighborhood survive.
And of
And
course, the
that,
century ants, you
Mhm.
know, they're self-sacrificing when they take with the cordyceps fungus and they take the infected out around back. They do away with the infected and then they eliminate themselves in case they were infected.
That's right. And like, so the older ants stay on the periphery, and there's actually even ants that are garbage dump grannies that just live in the garbage dump and they never come inside. Yes, about the trees. That's interesting. And also like when I showed the acacia ants, the acacia is invested in their success. So the acacia provides homes that protect them. And that's like I talk about that a lot with entrepreneurs of like, who can you help that would invest in you? And so thinking that way.
So there's something there too and you put it in there intentionally. I'm curious about it. You said generally the most mature of especially in the eusocial insect world are the ones that are exploring the most, which is interesting because I think in your consulting, do you come across that that the best explorers are the most mature, or how do you see a correlation or a tendency towards exploitation as people become more mature in their careers?
Well, it's hard. I mean, we're so parasitized, it's hard to say. But in the baboons, the hamadryas, which they act amazingly like us, like same kind of structure. But for them, there's a leader male, and he'll kind of go the way he wants to go in the morning, and then all the grannies will go the way they want to go. And they kind of do this thing where they wipe their noses. They're really nervous about it because he knows that his authority is being challenged. And eventually the grannies decide where to go because they know where the food is. They are the ones that have been doing all the testing and stuff all along. And so they are actually the ecological wisdom keepers, and the leader male will go along with them, but he has to pretend like he's the guy. And then he'll just
Turkeys work the same way.
Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. The matriarchy will make the decisions, but you'll see the male Tom will kind of like behave similarly where there's yeah,
I was
that's
gonna
so funny.
That's where I was going anyway. Yeah.
Well, there's
So it's
interesting,
cross taxa. It's a
That's right.
convergent.
It's a deep pattern.
there's interesting relationships between the adaptedness of individuals, the cost of the tasks that they sort of self-select for. There's dimensionality there. Like
Yes.
exploration, when we talk about exploration, we're like mechanical, expending a lot of mechanical energy. The younger organisms, their muscles work efficiently, whereas the older individuals, maybe they've accumulated all these sort of memories, right? And that is sort of a different metabolism. So there's all these complex ecological linkages in those networks. And I think the question is, we think of each like body as an individual, but in fact, those bodies are not the unique
Right.
entity. It's that whole collective.
That's right. I mean, we store our memories in each other, and we store so much in each other.
But and there's different kinds of memory and knowledge, right? There's inactive knowledge, like that, say that mechanical, being able to move across the landscape knowledge.
Mhm.
And there may be spatial knowledge, like knowing where things are,
Mhm.
right? And so that process of developing specializations is really critical to the whole development of that meta individual.
That's absolutely right. And so like they're born in the nest, and the first job they have is in the nursery. That's where they are. And then as they age, they wander further out, and so then they start, working in the food, in the larders, and then eventually they work their way up to the top, and then they're out as patrollers, and finally they become soldiers. So the oldest individuals are the soldiers, because you wouldn't want to waste your core value on that. Which is like, wouldn't that be great if we fought our wars with old grannies? That would be so cool. They're knitting needles. Yeah.
The sacrificial, quote unquote, sacrificial roles.
That's right. Sacrificial grannies. They were years.
Okay.
So that, and so yes, and individuals are developing not just like some of them actually take on different physiological changes to fill that role, and other ones just age out. It can go either way, and for us, it's primarily developmental. Like we learn it.
I think I kind of get the sense that there's a much richer landscape around this idea of change. We're involved in this constant evolutionary process and dialogue, between our bodies and the environment. A lot of times we sort of get tied up in these metaphors, and because a lot of times they're just sort of one-dimensional, like the idea of the slave making species. Like, okay, that's one aspect of this whole landscape of things that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when we think about change, I think it may be helpful to think about sort of parallel toolkits, right? It's like not just one thing, it's actually a lot of things kind of going on at the same time. And like within our own species, we have this huge neurodiversity or metabolic diversity. How do you begin to work with that?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's like our bodies, right? Like all the cells working together, and like it's a dance.
Yeah.
It's hopelessly complex, and yet, nature doesn't figure all that stuff out. It just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that. We just need to get out of our way. But one thing I think is really interesting about what you just brought up was that individuals in all species develop. They have a developmental trajectory, but also superorganism colonies have the same developmental trajectory. Termite mounds might last 2,000 years, but they do fade, and so they have that same kind of trajectory where they age out. And that's like our civilizations. That's a natural trajectory.
Yeah, there's this life cycle, but within that life cycle, there's a kind of complexity. There's like this division of labor. So again, this sort of maybe gets to like, what are the thinking about different metaphors. It's like, is there a metaphor we can start to think about that greater level of complexity that actually makes it not so hard to deal with?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's shared purpose.
Yeah.
Some shared purpose and some shared communication roles. And then you rely on collective intelligence and and like a waggle dance kind of processes that amplify and fade.
Yeah, and then you also have sort of this mode of operations, like you were talking about, the sort of daily operations. So
Yeah.
there's some authors that talk about the idea of a social contract, and those are kind of the basic agreements that people have, like just be polite. Like most everything we need, we learned in kindergarten.
It really is true.
Yeah, yeah. We don't even think about it, right?
Yeah.
So like, is there another alphabet that, might be useful?
Well, I think about, like as kids, we always did all the hand things, like jump rope. I think about like, what if I could teach this that way? Like, what if kids were, had little superorganism?
Right.
Because I remember like all the things like that we used to say, like, you're not the boss of me. That's a
Yep.
superorganism thing, right? Because it already feels natural.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think about change, it takes time. We all went through those experiences.
Mhm.
And, growing up, what does that take for human beings? It takes like 18, well, human beings in the Western world takes a good 18 years.
Yeah. Well, give me the child until they are 6 and they shall be mine for
Yeah,
life.
yeah. How
Well,
much time do you need for an organization to change its purpose?
that's
Yours.
partly why I have these different endeavors, because I feel like the Rehumanized Minds is really based on just being able to see fresh, just even be curious and have that imagination again.
Yeah.
And then like organizations, just the daily operations is all they care about. So that's an entry point. And with the geoversity, it's the biocultural renewal of connecting the land again. So it's like we have to work on these different levels. I think of it as paradigm, structure, and process. And then I have a noble revolution, because I think that if we had women and girls at the table at 51%, I think that we'd be in good shape, better shape. We're wasting half our collective intelligence.
Yeah, so like, I work with these, professionals, right? That have been doing what they do for years, and every day they're doing it and doing it. How do you begin to talk with them about change? Well, sometimes, what you get back is, yeah, just tell me what to do, or, change the building code. Don't bother me, go change the building code, right?
Yeah. Well, one of my things right now is I'm this very subversive idea of I've got those pentads. It also works for all organisms, not just superorganisms. That's a superorganism special one. So I have that pentad and I use it for any organism. And so I have the 5 patterns for any organism, almost like Pokemon cards for different organisms. But it's using that pentad so that it's training the kids to think that way while they're doing that fun thing. And so it's great for biomimicry workshops, because you can just search for the hashtags of the animal or the role or the function, and bring them up, and you can do it by region. So you could get organisms that are specific to your region. I mean, it's gonna be fantastic for kids, all their projects and things. But meanwhile, they're learning about the pentad and how that works. And then by the time they get to work, 18 or 21 or whatever, they're going to be like, what we're superorganisms, why are we doing this way? That's my subversive plan.
Don't you do that while you're in the adult play plan?
I do it in the adult play.
And what's the resistance in that layer, or are they open?
They love it.
So there is such a thing as an exponentially scaling this?
Yes, I'm doing that. I am going to do this revolution. It kills me.
So there's something that you had, Randy, that you had brought up on the complexity issue. And I think that, like, I would posit, and tell me what you think of this, but with conscious evolution, like, we have to do a lot of deductive reasoning. So we like to take very complex scenarios and then try to filter out the noise to get to something that we can make a, essentially a prediction about, like, so that we can react ahead of whatever the risk is, or react ahead of the curve to get the benefit, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so our brains are deductive in that sense, and nature isn't. Nature is going to always have this constant concert of complexity, because there is no other there isn't that ability innate, right? Like, we're not injecting that human decision into the loop. It's just emergent. It's not to say that it's dumb or not a learned process. Past success contributes to success in fitness. That's the whole point of it. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, no matter how much you can market a bottle of juice to be cold pressed, natural, organic, well-being, vitamin, healthy, all this stuff, that value chain, how we arrived at that bottle of juice, is never going to be as good for the human and the rest of the ecosystem as having the grapefruit tree that the human goes and accesses when the grapefruit is ripe. And they walk to the tree, they pick the grapefruit, they walk back. That's totally different than the world that we're living in now.
Right.
And I guess rectifying that while still trying to answer the question of tell me what to do, and it has to be 7 sentences or less, probably 3 sentences or less, is really a challenge. I'm curious how you guys approach that.
Yeah. Okay. So we, yes, I mean, I'm a scientist, right? I'm like schooled in deductive logic to the hilt. And I hit a point where I couldn't do the work that I do with it, because like you say, in a complex world, what we're really looking at is patterns. And so it's a generalizable pattern, but each instance is unique. And so deductive reasoning doesn't really work with that. And so, but we're not trained in inductive reasoning at all. I mean, maybe in the humanities, some people are, but not sciences at all. I mean, we get to come up with a hypothesis, but there's no training on how to come up with hypotheses. And yet, as a naturalist, as a field biologist, I look for patterns. And that's what people naturally do. We're like amazing pattern seekers. Like, we're actually designed for that. And so, like, when you're like, if you're with the Kalahari, with the San Bush people, that like their pattern knowledge is unreal, like to the extent where it feels like they're in another dimension. They're seeing things that we don't see. So we have that ability. We're just not schooled in it at all. That's what I'm doing with the Geo School. And so I'm trying to take these students. The idea is half Indigenous students and half students that are, private schools that pay double to pay for the Indigenous students, so that we have this, young leaders coming together, and they go through a 4-year program together. But then they develop that pattern knowledge. So they're learning how to track. They're learning the organisms in their neighborhood and the relationships between them. So we're training their eyes to see those patterns again and make decisions from that. They don't train you how. And so that's our whole program, really. And then they're all going to Panama for this 8-week experience, where now they have that pattern recognition ability, and they can start going to work on creating something together. Because the idea is that here come these kids with all these resources, and then here come these kids that are, basically living on the land where the 80% of the biodiversity remains. So they need to have those skills, and they need to have that network. So that's my point.
For human beings, we can work through complexity. Over time, we can learn. We, just look at, where we're at today and where we were 10 or 20 years ago. Not that we're real smart about it. We're penetrating that complexity. There's complexity, and there's complicatedness, and there's chaotic things right? We're actually creating a new language around. We're starting to see patterns and being able to work with them and be effective. But that, like I said, that takes time. If you know what you're doing, you know how much time you need. If you don't, it's an unknown. So organizations get interested when they know they have a problem.
Mhm.
And if they encounter an unknown, that's one kind of problem. That's an entry point. Like, what are your unknowns? These are the kinds of things I'm interested in. So how do you begin to have that dialogue
Mhm.
where it gets to a more meaningful level where, where they're actually beginning to engage in literally changing their minds? Is it a conscious process? Not always. Is it an intentional process? Sometimes. Or what does that look like?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
there's a lot of possibilities there.
There's so much cultural work that needs to be done.
Yeah. So as an architect, I'm always asking, well, at one level is, what does it look like? Well, it looks like a house. No, it doesn't look like a house. What does it look like? Well, maybe it looks like a school.
Mhm.
Well, so you're doing this geoversity thing.
Yes.
So there's a pattern, there's a cultural pattern. It's familiar. It's like, I can approach that. I can feel comfortable. Like, oh, I'm going to go to school.
Mhm.
But is that do we need something else? Right? Do we have enough time?
No.
And if the answer is no, maybe we're missing something. So what are we missing?
I believe what we have everything already.
Mhm.
And it's just connecting it and unleashing it. It's a structural problem. So I feel like structures can be changed very fast. I see this across the board, companies going, we know what we have isn't working. But they come in at the collective intelligence or the swarm creativity or the marketing, or I've had people come in to prevent parasites. So they come in for special problems. They don't come in going, how do we make the world a better place? But in the end, to regenerate what you're doing and deepen it and grow your own potential, you end up having to do it.
When you deal with a corporation, the individuals that make up the corporation, what percentage are there because it's their purpose to be there, or how many of them are there because they need a salary?
So I don't know. I found that they're real people and they are just as motivated as we are. A lot of times they feel very constrained.
What's the constraint?
That the bottom line or the other people in power and what have you. But they're also always asking me, like, how can I get that in? And what I'm told is that because it's based on science, it doesn't have a bias, which isn't true, but so they're open to it. This is science, it's supposed to be right.
And does anybody from the marketing side of the company attend these meetings?
No, but let's do that.
Because that's where it helps to be not only on the outside of the company, but influencing the inside of the company with the same dialogue.
Yeah. Yes, I am trying to get my little paws into every pie there. So that's the thing. It works for everyone in every facet of the business if you make the case.
That's promising. That's great.
Yeah. So one of the things I was trying to get at a little earlier was sort of this idea of parallel toolkits.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Gregory Bateson.
Oh, I love him. Yeah.
Nora Bateson. You know Nora, or you've done. So
I don't know her personally, but we have
Yeah.
parallel lives.
Well, I mean, she does this interesting exercise, which is derived from Gregory's writings. And in one of his books, he talks about double vision. It's like we have two eyes, right? And if you try to look through one eye, you sort of miss a lot. But with two eyes, you can see more, right? And so she has this process. What does she call it? Warm data.
A warm data, yeah.
Yeah. You can't do it yourself. You need multiple people to do it. And through that process, you can gain insight in your situation and different ways of responding to it. So this is sort of getting to this theme of complexity and parallel toolkits. Of how do you begin to address complexity in organizations? It may be that doing it yourself isn't going to get you there. When you get your hair done, you go to somebody who specializes in that. And that's sort of a cultural thing. It's like it's a cooperative venture. Right? So it's that those two eyes together, like me, I have my identity of myself in the world, and then I've got the barber who has the vision of me, a different vision of me in the world, and we work together to create something that we couldn't create on our own.
Yeah, the rehumanized minds. So that's partly what that is about, because so we use 3 braided strand of nature, complex, and art, complex, and mythic story, complex, and all 3 of them have different perspectives, individuals, threads. And so to really understand it, you have to be looking from those different perspectives. So that's part of the training that we do. And that's for organizations, that they would put all their people through it, because anybody can enter a myth of somebody, and it helps you see, because all those perspectives are true in the story. And so we say, where are you at in that story? And so it doesn't have a value, a moral value to them. It's a story. So they can just enter it that way. And art is what they make it. And the nature is what they perceive. Or now you're tracking. Can you imagine what that fox is doing and thinking and where it might go? So it's training them in all those things of how to understand complexity and even think about it and talk about it and how to change it.
When people approach you, are they expecting you to present to them the solution that gives them that icing on their cake, that they don't have to struggle through this, but here's the answer?
I think Cisco was hoping that. So these ants, can we you have an algorithm? Can we just plug in the algorithm and would that work?
So everybody's still pushing technology to solve this planetary crisis.
Totally.
And so is that like, you just don't ask that question,
No, I roll with it. I'm like, okay, how do we start? And then, they'll develop the thing, and then they'll go, oh, but this only works if this. And then you're like, yeah, that's a cultural problem.
Could we introduce them to the technology of nature?
Yeah, I do. They love it. They love it.
So I mean, that's a paradigm right there, the technology of nature. I mean, that's the notion of reducing that whole reductionist or extractionist perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You just start, okay, we're starting from A.
Usually talking about entry points. And, so one of those entry points is, just the day-to-day stuff you do. Another one of those entry points, a lot of people are talking about waste, these big, hairy, audacious goals, like 0 waste. I kind of feel like that, that's backing into that. You're looking at a symptom and they're treating the symptom.
Yes, and if you look at that superorganism, if it's parasitized, the waste stream is not a leverage point. That's an indicator. And so all of this, hey, Karen, recycle, that's just preventing Karen from joining the revolution. I think that's just keeping Karen busy.
It's a little ironic, but I just saw an article that described the notion of how the circular economy is showing up with some unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And everybody jumped right in. Even biomimicry came on board because that was the only platform that could come close to what?
It's the best we had.
Right, but I thought that that would be the reason not to join it, because the best we had was in nature as mentor, not a circular economy. It's the circular ecology that we're hoping for. I mean, that's the premise here, that we need to regenerate ecology in
Yeah.
order for us to have an economy. So it's interesting that everybody jumps into, oh, here it is, this is now, and then it's not.
Mhm.
So we're keep postponing the actual path.
Well, one thing I've had some success with too is, especially in like the Caribbean and Latin America, like working with entrepreneurs, but they're usually looking for innovation, like something to make money with. You know, I do a lot of work with them on the waste. Like there's so much opportunity, you know, and this is what carbon is used for. This is like, so, and then I can see their little brains are like, oh my God, it's just right there. I can touch it, you know. And then they're like, how do I get that out of the air into this? So then they go off and try to invent things. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's sort of not backing into dealing with the symptom. It's maybe thinking about that situation and how can you influence it to go in a different direction.
So many people are just in despair, and when you can flip it to an opportunity like that, the energy in the room goes up, you know, and people feel like they can actually do something.
I think, again, this is so much more about the evolution, the evolutionary process, and sort of seeing, okay, parasites are part of that,
Mhm.
as are symbiotes.
Mhm.
And the complexity of all that is what? Appreciable, right? But once you start to appreciate that, then you can begin to influence it.
Mhm.
But this sort of gets back to what the colonial mindset, like, wow, look what I can do.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like the rehumanized minds, it's trying to uncolonize minds.
Yeah. I think Bateson was one who he used the term ecology of mind,
Mhm.
right? And that's, you know, I think there's this winner take all mindset,
Mhm.
which is something we need to be very wary of. So that goes back to this sort of question of evolution. And as knowledgeable beings, I'm not going to say intelligent, knowledgeable beings, we have that power, and sometimes that power sort of becomes an end in itself, something that we've got to learn how to work with a little more mindfully.
The rehumanized minds with the stories, like,
Yeah.
and tracking, where you're shifting your perspective to other organisms, that process of consideration is what checks you. Because you're
Mhm.
like, oh, I could make this crazy cool thing. Oh, that would be so cool. Like, yeah, that would be great. And then you're like, oh, but the raccoon lives there. Not so great for that guy.
That storytelling, I think, yeah, that can be a really important tool. Maybe one of the most wonderful tools that humans have evolved.
Yeah, it's pretty good stuff.
Something that we talked about earlier about food and the notion of what the first supermarket started in this country in 1946. And before that, it was the local shop next to the farm.
Mhm.
And when you look at where supermarkets are, they're always indoors in a no-windowed building. And that's where farming products end up. And I found it so, why isn't it under a big windowed building that's open that people could see outside? And you're just coming in
Comes from.
to they're just tables for you to take stuff from, which is what happened to these little stands near the farms on the roadway. So you could drive to that
Yeah.
local farm and pick it up. But when we got to be a planet that gets food shipped around, we are not relating ourselves to our own biome. So we don't find grapefruits in New York because they don't grow here. So if we have to acknowledge that our bodies belong to where food is grown locally, a lot of the fruits we wouldn't be getting from them, except maybe for apples and pumpkins. So that piece of the conversation, I don't know how well that's going to go over when you recognize that.
Oh, none of it's going to go over, but maybe when fuel is like $20 a gallon, maybe they would just have to settle for that.
Well, right now it's at 6.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you do an analysis, what people go out and buy their bottles of water, you add it all up together to get to a gallon, and water is about $10 a gallon.
Wow.
So that piece of economy is not translated. All the water companies are just shoving plastic onto the shelves. And they're just, you look at the number and you take it, oh, that's an incremental cost for me. But they don't look at it as what am I paying for water versus what am I paying for gas? And we're ending up getting a free edition of drinking microplastic as well. So there's like this, do we recognize humanity as parasites?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot about that. And the sister taxa thing is interesting to me because maybe some of us are parasites. But I mean, I've certainly known a few, but I tend to think it's because our cultures replicate as well as our genes. So there's really 2 replicating systems, and it's some of the memes are parasitic, not us.
Yeah, when Chicago became the source for the new dimension in architecture, and now all of a sudden the West was now exporting concrete forests, and the entire world looks like New York. So it's like this notion of the architectural profession was filled with this notion of technology and ideas and creativity, but now has to take a redo, a reboot, a review, and come up with a different, more sensitive approach to how we meet the land. But still, the materials become the issue. You're dealing with a corporation that only is dealing within technology, which is not, you're tearing down or you're digging up materials that are rare earth materials, which is minimal compared to forests that are being torn down. So it's like, how do we make that shift when I don't know what percentage of the planet still has villages that are vacant, that exist and could come back?
You're touching on something really delicious, Harry, and it's sort of like life's awkward moments, right? Like when you realize, hey, I really don't know anything. So like there's this question of ethics, right? Where as an architect, we're taught, it's sort of drummed into our heads, this protect the human health, safety, and welfare. And then you learn, oh my God, this is going to kill everybody. And how do you change it? How do you change it? It's going to kill everybody, but then to change it, you got to kill everybody. But maybe there's another path, right?
Yeah.
So there's this dilemma. And this is where, Bill Reed and, the Regenesis folks, you discover that dilemma and then you reconcile that, so there's the reconciling path. that's an aspect, at least for myself, like that's something that,
Yeah.
how do you begin to deal with that? So, and so where's an entry point? One entry point for that sort of specialized group of folks might be the ethical dilemma. Right? When you realize that you got two paths that diverge in the wood and they sort of lead to the same place, unless you sort of put on some different lenses, like learn different new materials. And, so now we have what's emerging out of that is this whole new set of technologies that are just still pretty nascent.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the reconciliation.
Yes.
But a lot of the activity is sort of still dealing with like symptoms, like how do you
Problems.
Yeah.
Problems.
Yeah.
Right. I use all of the Regenesis frameworks in my work. That's one of the things they do is they have they have a pentad as well, where it's feed what feeds you, that little circle there. They have this value adding process that they use there. And so, it's like, okay, you gather the resources, you refine them, you put them together. There's all these things that you do before your product goes out. But then if you take each one of those things and you look at the pentad, it's like how it can that add value to all these others. And so then you start going, I could do it in a different way that would add way more value. And so that's a benefit. And then you do the next one and you do the next one. And pretty soon that whole pentad is aligned between the environment, the project, and the beings in it.
That's a decomposition of the entire industry.
Yeah. So the idea is to get everybody to go through that.
Whoa, I'm in for that.
Yeah, that's the next course.
Yeah. And so I think that's sort of an interesting aspect of this, is looking at your pentad. It's sort of superorganism centric. And so, when you think of the theme of waste, if you pop up another level, there's a whole level of this ecology that could care less. It's like parasites, great.
Right.
They make this waste, and that waste is sort of a delicious food, right? And I'm not saying like that's the way to do it, but so like, in the business world, there's a whole mess of folks who are into mergers and acquisitions, and they're looking for companies that are, just hobbling along, and maybe they'll buy up and strip it out and turn it into something else.
Yeah.
So there's this whole, that's sort of this, idea of recycling.
It sounds more like upcycling.
Upcycling. Yeah, that's sure. Better way to.
So I have a question about that. Earlier, you made the comment of a waste stream is not a leverage point, and I think then the follow-on was, well, it's a symptom of other stuff that's going on, and then there was some discussion of the circular economy and this upcycling and the obviously the circularity of the ecology. So how do we define waste then? I tend to agree. But I'm curious, just kind of, if it's not a leverage point, what do you classify it as?
Well, it's an indicator. So you can measure the waste and use it as a proxy for an amount of parasitism. But it kind of is a leverage point because it's an opportunity for some other creature or some other species or some other something. So in that sense, it is a leverage point. But even then, it doesn't change the thing. It just uses the waste, but it doesn't really change the system of the production. So
Got it.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
It sort of depends, right? Depends on your perspective. So like there's this caterpillar, the tomato hornworm, right? And we had one in our garden, and it's got all these little white specks on it. Well, those are parasites. And we love those parasites because they kill the hornworms. I mean, they're ugly as sin, but there they are. They're useful parasites because we don't want those pests, right? So there's a perspective where, okay, that waste, I'm okay with it.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're okay with it.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, and in nature, they never try to eliminate waste. In fact, it's kind of a rule to be sloppy and wasteful
Yeah.
because it makes more opportunities for other species and increases your resilience.
Right.
So waste is great. It just, if it builds up, then you've got an unhealthy
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. So that's how do you begin to identify that the actual problem that you want to deal with, or that you need to deal with, and that you're capable of dealing with.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's where, like, when I was talking about the companies will do something when they realize they have a problem.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times they just don't realize they have a problem.
No, they don't. Yeah. And then the other thing too is like, okay, so if you get your materials, let's say you're getting your materials for your iPhone over in Africa, and some kids' lives are really crummy because of that, but it's outside of your system. So it's just something you buy and you get it and you make it in your phone and you use it. But if you were to use that value adding process, you would go, okay, we got this. So we're going to buy this mineral, but it has to increase our collective intelligence, and it has to increase our shared identity, and it has to increase this. And so then you're like, you either try to find it closer to home, or you start including those people in your system. And that, and I think like the Regenesis folks are always like, it's all about place and the place. But I don't know that we can do that because we're too far gone. And I think if you're a hardliner on that, I think you'll get rejected because it's not workable. We have these global networks now. I mean, look at us here.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to shift our ideas around that to keep local networks that are local in purpose.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think when you talk about place, I want to counter that with scale.
Mhm.
Like, what do you mean by place? Like, this is a place right on my,
Yeah.
back of my hand.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly fine place
Mhm.
for, the little microbes that are living there. Or, here's on my beard, or here in my room, or, and the world is a place, right? The earth is a place. Like, I just came off of another call. It's like aerospace engineers. We're thinking about how do we do zero carbon flight, right? I think it's interesting that that problem set of accumulating waste is telegraphing across levels. There's all kinds of levels you can think about carbon, and the ecology of carbon. What we want to do, understand the larger system well enough so that we can solve one problem without creating another unmanageable one. Oh my
Yeah.
God, it's carbon. You got to bury it. Kill it. Yeah. And that's sort of like, that's totally idiotic. Like, no,
Yeah.
it's a resource.
And there's the other problem is because, everybody's like, save the world, the whole world. And you're like, yeah, but I can't.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's part of the benefit too, of bringing it back to the biology, is that
Grounding it.
change happen in populations.
Well, systems in life are self-organizing and follow simple rules. Back to your comments on ethics. So if the rules are too complex, then what you end up with is, well, we'll just decarbonize, because that's a simple rule and we can measure it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to know that the greenest the planet has ever been is when CO2 level was at 800. COT is healthy, but it's not the CO2 we're producing. everything that we're burning
Mhm.
is not the CO2 we need.
Mm.
So if people walk around saying, no, it's okay at 400 and 500, it is if we weren't doing what we're doing. So it's an extraordinary perspective of how we need to make that case. And the only way you make a case on the business side is showing them where if they went that way, they would be more profitable.
That's
Well, no, I think there's more to it than that. So one of it is realizing you have a problem.
Mhm.
The other part of it is owning it
Mhm.
or wanting to own it.
Yes, and that's another thing of because we get our materials from somewhere else, we can externalize all that. We never have to optimize their system.
Mhm.
We just all kind of assume that someone's taking care of that orange line. And nobody is.
No, there is no brand that's profitable on this planet because they haven't taken into account nature's capital.
Mm.
The
Mhm.
individual companies that access nature's diversity, that's not on the tab.
A lot of companies they haven't realized it's a problem. They don't understand the problem that they have. Getting to that point is sort of the necessary entry point for all of us to sort of get through this.
Yeah, I mean, you usually find that everybody knows what the problem is, but it's nobody's problem.
Mhm. And so that's what I mean by you've got to own that in
Mhm.
your own way. Whatever way you back into it and realize, oh, that's mine.
And you'll relate to this. Like a lot of time, it's engineers that I'm talking to.
Mhm.
And if I come at them with,
Yeah.
and if you're like, okay, collective intelligence works like this, and we can do all this, and then they're like, cool, sign me up. And then like a week later, I'm like, hey, and then there's this orange line, and they're like, oh, we don't have a floor in this VR.
Mhm.
Right. The other thing that reminds me of is like pick a river in China and pick the color that you want it in,
Oh my God.
because they exist. There are yellow rivers, there are red rivers, there are blue rivers. They're all coming from toxic chemicals and textiles.
Are
I
you
could-
kidding me?
No, I could find you pictures of what they look like.
And then, I'm just thinking of my trip down the river with the Kuna people, and it's like we drank out of that river the whole way.
Yeah.
And like that's their babies. That's like that's them. The river's them.
So this sort of again it goes back to intelligence. One of the things I learned through the the biomimicry thing is the antenna, right? We don't have we haven't necessarily developed the sensitivity or the antenna for that particular problem or situation. It's a party and everybody's talking and you don't know anybody. At what point does something catch your attention, or does it never happen?
Mhm.
Or does it not happen for long enough that you slow down and actually have a conversation? I think that's kind of what's happening. It's like number one, there's a lot of noise,
Mhm.
and everybody's just kind of going all these different ways, dealing with it, and that's part of the problem is people are just so busy, and when you're busy you just tend not to.
The problem has to hurt worse than the solution for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I mean, just how bad does it have to get? Well, not today.
Not
It
today.
might
Not
might
today.
be. Well, it's great that you're doing this, and kudos to you for putting all these things together. I kind of feel like you're going 80 miles an hour and you got all these things going on.
Mhm.
I-
Plus all the children.
Yeah. Oh my God. How do you do it?
I
How
don't
do you
know.
do it?
I don't know. One of these days I'm gonna stop.
Mm.
Oh.
One of the things I was getting at, and maybe me being too subtle, is maybe you don't have to do it all on your own, right?
Would I not?
How do you bring other folks in and
But then I like it's
and develop that sort of distribution of labor that creates a bigger toolkit?
Yeah.
that people can use. And so it's not about, this is like, Steve Jobs's thing. It's, stop talking about the MIPS and the clock cycles and the,
Yeah.
megabytes, and think about what people can do, what some smart people can do with this,
Yeah.
and the smart people who are winning with it. A lot of folks who have succeeded, you're one of them. Like you're your own success story.
Mm.
And telling your story is, I think, part of the scenario. But people like, Gregory Bateson, he was an evolutionary biologist. This guy, Ludwig Bertalanffy, he was an evolutionary biologist.
Mm.
He developed this whole thing of systems thinking, right? Cybernetics. And not that that's like the end all and be all, absolutely not. But, like, who are the heroes in this? This might be one way of relating to folks.
I'm good with the animal stories and
Yeah.
the people stories.
Yeah. Well, Jane Goodall, like, she's just such a sweetheart.
She's a saint.
Yeah. I think it's part of the process. Once people start, it's like, I imagine like the process of ants or bees finding a new home. It's like they're searching and searching, and it's kind of all this noisy searching, and then all of a sudden there's some kind of a signal, and
All right, Randy.
I'm
Well,
here.
talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Likewise. Good,
Okay.
Good chatting with you. See you
Okay.
later.
Bye.